Hey, welcome back to another video on our PHP 2 e-commerce app. So in the last video we left you with checkout and a design for what this thing has to do. So we need to have a function called new item, and it will be found in the OrdersDataService. The other function that we're going to have is addDetailsLines. So this will probably be called multiple times since there are multiple lines in our order. This will also be in the OrdersDataService. Then the third requirement is to make sure that this transaction is atomic in nature, so it'll fail or succeed altogether or not at all. So let's go ahead and examine these two functions here in details. So I have the OrdersDataService module open here, and I think we created this sometime earlier in a previous tutorial because it's here in my code. So if you haven't got that yet, it's pretty basic. It says we're going to have an order object sent to us. We're going to open up a database connection and insert the order into the orders table and then bind it and close the connection. So that's pretty much standard fare here for how you create any kind of a database operation. So there's one change that we have to make for the design that we've got here. So back to our requirements here, item number 3, which is make sure that this transaction is atomic. And so what we're going to have to do is create a connection before we try this statement. So I'm just going to add a parameter called connection, and then in the first two lines I'm going to comment them out. So that means it's going to rely on a connection that was created before the function began. So since there's a create connection here, I'm going to comment the close connection in the two locations at the bottom of my function. So that relies on the data service here to create a new item for the orders table. Now let's write up a new function here for the second requirement, which is addDetailsLine. So since we don't have addDetailsLine anywhere in my list here, I'm going to create a new one. So we'll create the function design right here with 3 parameters. We'll have to have the order number here. So the order ID is always associated with something that was just created a step earlier. The order details is an object, and then a connection. We want the connection to be shared among multiple transactions here in this process. Okay, and I'm going to add some notes here so that we know what we're trying to program. My goal here is to create a new line in the order details table. And then when we're finished, assuming we're successful, I'll return the ID number of the last item inserted. If we're not successful, we should return a negative number or something to tell us it was failure. Okay, so the first step in creating a transaction is we have to define a statement, and we'll use prepared statements. Alright, so our statement is going to be insert into order details. And so we're going to want to use all of the column headings in our database. So orders ID, products ID, quantity, current price, and current description. And then we have to have 5 question marks listed in our values statement. Alright, so the next we're going to have to do is check to see if the statement is valid. So if the statement was able to be prepared, then we know it was successful. Otherwise, we have probably a syntax error in the statement itself. Now you can see that I'm echoing directly to the screen. We're going to fix this later. We shouldn't be echoing messages to the screen inside of anything that is not a view or a handler. So returning a -1 will tell the handler later that there's a problem. So we're going to fix the echo statement in a future video. Okay, now I'm going to go through a list of values that we're going to insert and associate with our binding. Now I'm trying to get the order details properties, and so as you can see as I'm typing, it doesn't automatically autocomplete. So to fix the autocomplete issue, I can create temporarily a new orders object. So let's go ahead and attempt to retype the order details here. So I'm going to delete back to the arrow, and when I complete the arrow, you can see the autocomplete in Eclipse is now working. So I'm looking for the product ID. And now I know I've spelled it right because of autocomplete. So I'm going to now simply create 4 new variables and assign the properties of each item in the order details. So the next process is to do the binding. So I'm going to create the statement arrow bind parameter, and now we have to associate these question marks with a variable. So you can see I'm simply just typing out the column names and the variables that are associated with them. Inside of the quotation marks, I have to tell which kind of data type is expected for each variable. So I'm going to type in for order ID as an integer for I. Product ID is integer. Quantity is integer. Price is a float, or we would call it a double or a D. And description is a string, so we get the letter S. We can probably come back to the order details and comment that out so it doesn't interfere with our program anymore. Now the last steps are to execute the query and see if there was any success. So let's choose an if statement. Now I want to use a function called affected rows, and we'll check to see if that's greater than 0. If it is, that means a success happened. Otherwise, nothing was inserted, and we'll call it a failure. So I'm using -1 as my return value to say that something went wrong. So in the manual for PHP, you will find that there is a function called insert ID. That will tell you for a database connection the actual ID number of the last record that was inserted. And so we want to return that as the value of our function. So now I've returned to the order business service, and I now have functions that I can call. I have new item, and I had add details. So the next video we're going to make sure that these transactions work together as one atomic unit.